Morena, I'm ecstatic to be here. This is a speech that they wrote for me that I'm not going to use. And you know, I have to apologise consistently to speechwriters because they raise issues that are important issues and they put them inside a speech. But at the end of the day, you have to go with your gut when you're talking to people who know what they're doing. And so often when I find a speech, particularly in education, I would be telling you how to suck eggs if I actually followed what they told me to say. And this is such an exciting conference. I cannot tell you how jealous I am of you, the fact that you are going to be able to be here for 3 days and wander around and have a look at and participate in some of the workshops and some of the knowledge that is going to happen here. I have threatened to sneak back, as just me, to come and sit in on some of the sessions. I'm particularly interested in the sessions that are being run around assistive technology for some of our students who have challenges that require such technology. But I want to start this morning by actually talking about the education conversation. For me, the education conversation that has been launched under the coalition government to set a 30-year strategic plan started in 2008, because that's when national standards was mentioned during an election at that period of time. I was on the Board of Trustees at Warkworth Primary School, and I couldn't understand that conversation. I'm sorry, I couldn't understand it. We had formative assessment tools that we were using. We had 2-year progressions inside the New Zealand curriculum that was supposed to be embedded from 2008 and 2009 onward. We had stay nines, and they reflected the more human reality of how children progress in their learning. It was understandable to our parents because the 2-year progressions at the back of the New Zealand curriculum looked very like the growth progressions inside Plunkett charts, and they were more human. So for me, the education conversation started way back then. In 2009, when they were finally implemented, I actually probably got 6 months into the implementation of national standards, and then I resigned from the Board of Trustees at Warkworth Primary School because I was not prepared to actually be part of a board that implemented them. And then in 2012, Pasi Solberg came. By that time, I was an elected official or an elected MP in the opposition for New Zealand First, and Catherine Delahunty and I began to work from the Green Party, began to work very closely together around not only formative assessment tools and opposition to national standards, but also around disability and learning support, or the lack of it, for our young people. We were having conversations about the germ. We were part of what was that movement inside of Parliament. And so when Pasi Solberg was brought out by NZEI in 2012, we were able to take an opportunity to sit down with them and have a conversation about how Finland had set a direction and an understanding for education that was never affected by an election. It didn't matter who was the Minister of Education at the time, education was able to continue. Because as a nation, they had decided what success looked like. As a nation, they had accepted that their teaching profession was exactly that, a profession. They had created an environment of high trust with that profession so that the parental body, the student body, and anybody else knew that those professionals were using their professional capacity to do the best and were supported to provide the best for their students, no matter what that best was. We talked about equity of opportunity, so that no matter where you were in the country, if that was what we believed you needed to be your best, that was what you received. So that that rural-urban divide didn't continue to grow. So it was after that meeting in 2012 that I wrote the New Zealand First policy about having an education conversation to set a 30-year strategic plan inside New Zealand. That's the first step. And I was one of the lead negotiators which formed the coalition government, and I raised that with both of the other major parties. the National Party had recognised that national standards needed to shift from a line in the sand to recognition of progression. They knew that it wasn't working. But the Labour Party actually came on board and said, we will do that. So that is why the 30-year conversation is inside the coalition agreement between New Zealand First and the Labour Party. And obviously it was a no-brainer for the Greens because Catherine and I had been spending all that time making sure that we were on the same page. So that's why we've had the education conversation. Tens of thousands of New Zealanders have participated in that conversation. The single question, the biggest question that we needed to get out the other side of that conversation was, what does success look like? What does a successful 5-year-old look like? What does a successful 10-year-old, 15-year-old, 50-year-old look like when we're talking about education? I'd run it in my school. I'd run it at Warkworth Primary School when we had to consult on our strategic plan some years before. And what interested me most was exactly what has been proven to be true out of the tens of thousands of people who've participated in that education conversation now. Numeracy and literacy aren't mentioned. That should be a given. Numeracy and literacy at the level that our students can be their best at should be a given, and the tools should be provided, which is why in a minute I'm going to switch to what is the Disability and Learning Support Action Plan that's currently out for conversation. But it was about every student knowing that they were good at something, because every student is. Every student being passionate about something and being given the support to follow that passion. It was about every student being able to meet failure and get up again. It was about every student knowing that if they needed help, they could reach out for it and somebody would be there for them. That was what success looked like. And that's exactly what has started to come through from the education conversation. So the education conversation, and I think there's going to be conversation about it over the next 3 days while you're here, it's the starting point. It's the starting point from my perspective to that continual conversation that we get this right, we know what we all agree on, and then we move further down that pathway to get to a place where politicians should not be inside the classroom. Politicians' jobs is to fund the profession to deliver in a high-trust model education that creates the success for each individual student, for each one of them to be the best they can be. So that's the goal. That's the starting point. That's the goal. And believe me, I have to keep making sure that we come back to what is the goal. The next thing I want to move on to, though, is about the Disability and Learning Support Action Plan. So most of this came out of the dyslexia, dyspraxia, and children on the autism inquiry spectrum. And it has been an interesting conversation to get to this point, 11 months, 12 months in, to get to this point where we've been able to make sure that the conversation is about all of our students. What has happened over a number of years for children with high complex physical needs or neurodiverse needs, high and complex neurodiverse needs, is that they have had to fight so hard to get any support at all that they have, quite rightly, I believe, become a little concerned that when I was talking about the fact that this was for every student, they became a little concerned that they would get lost. And I absolutely understand it. But the Disability and Learning Support Action Plan is for every child. So that's those with high and complex physical and neurodiverse needs, but it's also for every child in the middle. Every child with moderate needs that up to this point has had to struggle along on their own. And we're also recognising gifted children once again, because gifted children are often twice or thrice blessed. So while they may be gifted in one space, there are supports that they need to be the best they can be. Because up to this point, there has been an undercurrent of they're bright, they'll be fine. And actually, if you have a look at the stats, they are bright, but they're not always fine. We also want, one of the drivers that came out of the dyslexia, dyspraxia and autism inquiry was that, again, Catherine Delahunty, Chris Hipkins and myself had another 28 recommendations on top of what was the collective Select Committee's recommendations. The Select Committee at that time was dominated by government members, and at that time it was the national government. So, therefore, there were no recommendations there that actually had any money attached to them in the main part of the inquiry. The 28 recommendations that were added on in a minority report by Chris Hipkins, myself and Catherine Delahunty require funding. You cannot fix a broken system without making sure that you resource it appropriately. So the Disability and Learning Support Action Plan is out there. I ask for you to participate in it. I ask for you to go and have a look on the Ministry of Education website and go through it. I need your professional voice in it. The goal is to bring supports for our children as close to the ground as possible, as fast as possible. So it talks mostly about the Learning Support Coordinator, which you could say it's a SENCO. So the Learning Support Coordinator would be inside, it would be a full-time, fully paid walking position inside schools. And it answers what has been asked of us by the parental body, the student body, and also the teaching fraternity. But what I need is the following pieces of information. I need to know what the job description would look like. We've been running 3 pilots throughout New Zealand, so we've put some ideas down there. We've overlaid the successful pilots and we've placed what they have been doing, just as SENCOs, so no extra funding, and they've been doing some amazing stuff, as we all know that SENCOs do. So we've put a base there, but I need from you, what would that job description look like? And that's why I need it. So yeah, because that's not funny. Everything, I understand that. I'm not completely naive. But before we can go for the money, I need the job description, because the job description will give you the skill level, and the skill level will give you the pay level. I need, what would the coordinator-student ratio look like? What would it look like in an urban environment and a rural environment? Because too often we create urban solutions and then we try to get rural to fit into it. So I need that from you, because the moment I get that from you, and the submissions will close on the 31st of October, I can then go for the money. That's the whole point. It closes on the 31st of October, is I need to put in a budget bid. If I can put in a budget bid and be successful, we'll have the money on July 2019 and we'll be able to implement in 2020. But that's the process, which is why I need to come out to you for it. But the other thing that's also inside of there that I need your support in, we're going to do universal screening. We're going to do universal screening on need. At this stage, we have quite a lot of information about children who are at that very high complex end, the OARS children. We have a little bit of information about those children who just can't jump over that wall to get OARS funding. We have zero information about anybody else. And yet, the Dyslexia Foundation will tell us that 1 in 7 of our students is challenged somewhere on the dyslexia scale. And if we don't screen and start to support them early on, they believe they are stupid by the time they are 8 years old. And that starts to affect every way that they view themselves inside their lives. So we need to screen. We need to screen appropriately. We need to screen so it's not invasive, but it does start to blip up that there is something here that we should be trying. I need your input into that. You are the professionals, I am not. I am merely trying to reflect what the 3,000 parental voices asked for when we redesigned the learning support delivery model, and what the 457 voices asked for during that inquiry. So please, I implore you to find that document online, go to the Ministry of Education website, and please give me your views. Please put in there your professional expertise so that we can get this across the line and we can start to change this for our children. So I've done my pitch. That was my pitch. It's got nothing to do with what was on the page. But I'm asking you really to participate. Support us so that we can get to this place. Let's do better for our children. We have the expertise sitting inside our classrooms. We have the quality of individuals sitting inside this room. We just need to trust them. We need to resource them. And then we need to get on with it. I hope you have a fabulous 3 days. Thank you.